Ah, the world of Silent Hill. A world full of monsters that, at their most basic level, are truly personal demons. In the case of Silent Hill 3, these monsters are largely a representation of Heather, though not entirely Heather. One also has to consider that, given who she is, a lot of Alessa's fears are surfacing here as well. There are even other influences, though we'll get to those as we come to them. Hello, Roam Mithril here once again, and it's time to explore the symbolism of Silent Hill 3's monsters. First up, we have the Closer. Not counting Heather's nightmare, this is the first monster she sees in what seems to be reality. The Closer is encountered seemingly eating a human corpse, and serves as Heather's introduction to her living nightmare. Upon examination, it can be noted that the Closer towers over Heather, and is dressed in a feminine manner, seemingly wearing high heels and a skirt. This seems to symbolize a childhood fear of adults. Specifically, it seems likely that it stems from Alessa's memories of Dahlia's abuse. It takes its name from how it appears in narrow passages, closing off your path, likely how Alessa felt, restrained by the adults in her life. Next comes the Numb Body. The whipping boys of the game, Numb Bodies are the weakest of the monsters. They have a very underdeveloped look, with pale skin and visible veins, looking like a creature that isn't even fully formed yet. It thus seems to refer in some ways to an unborn fetus. As Heather continues her journey, they start appearing in larger sizes as well, showing how God is starting to grow within her. They also seem to have ties to Heather's realization of the truth of who she is. The term numb can thus be thought of like a dormancy, that of Alessa's memories within Heather, and once she's realized who she is, numb bodies no longer appear in the game. The next monster is the ever-present Doublehead. These pesky dogs appear almost everywhere in the game. There is a bit of a parallel in this monster to the Groaner of the original Silent Hill. Both are canine monsters, both stemming from Alessa's fear of large dogs. However, the Doublehead is born of a bit more than this. The appearance of the dog seems to mirror that of Alessa herself in her sick room, heavily burned and bandaged. The head, as the name suggests, is actually split in two, which is a common theme among many of the monsters in this game. A split. The split in question is of course Heather's own memories versus those of Alessa. This split is also symbolized by the next monster, the Pendulum. This annoying, gratingly loud monster is made up of two torsos, with a head on each end, surrounded by a bladed contraption. As it moves, the bodies flip through the air, one head thus constantly switching positions with the other, seemingly a show of a struggle for dominance. It shows the inner conflict Heather has with her other self, the emerging memories and personality of Alessa. The slashing blades and noise that accompany the beast is a representation of the pain that Heather and Alessa feel they cause to those around them as this struggle continues. Now we come to the first boss, Splitworm. Once more the split motif is present, again symbolizing the duality of Heather and Alessa. Largely the Splitworm serves as a parallel to the original Silent Hill's Split Head, a similar type of boss who, like the Splitworm, was the first boss monster faced by Heather's father, Harry Mason. There is, granted, undeniable sexual imagery at work here as well. The way Splitworm itself emerges from the various tunnels, as well as how the inner head emerges from the split of the outer shell, both seem indicative of childbirth. Splitworm's pronounced teeth and roars kind of a show of the pain of this event. As such, it speaks of the God growing within Heather that she's been chosen to birth. Next we come to the Insane Cancer. As its name suggests, this creature looks large and bloated, oozing pus from open sores. It truly looks like a giant cancerous tumor. At its most basic form, it seems it can symbolize the Silent Hill effect itself, if you will, a spreading cancer that starts to take over the area around it, twisting it and corrupting it, much as a cancerous disease will do. It even further behaves like a cancer, seeming to die but then just coming back stronger, as the monster's healing period does. As the one inadvertently causing it, it may also thus symbolize Alessa's feelings of self-despair, feeling she's a cancer to those around her, hurting them without meaning to. This, after all, is why she wanted to bestow a more gentle death to herself, to give Heather a more peaceful end than birthing God would have been, but also to protect those connected to it from any further danger. Next up is the, well, sewer monster. It doesn't seem to have any name beyond that from what I've seen. For that matter, there isn't even much that we actually see of the sewer monster beyond just one tentacle, no matter if you kill it or if it kills you. This is a key thing in figuring out what it means. The most simple explanation is that it's just a parallel to the original Silent Hill's Bloodsucker. However, the fact that so much of it is left to the imagination shows it for what it truly seems to be, a manifestation of the fear of the unknown. Then there's the Slurper. Excuse me one moment. I hate these things! Right, better. Okay, so the Slurpers. The Slurper has some representation of the bottom feeders of society, destined to crawl along the ground, feeding off whatever passes for edible substances it can find as it does so. However, there's more to it than that. The overall form of the Slurper seems decidedly more masculine than that of, for instance, the Closer. Where the Closer is seemingly wearing a skirt, the Slurper, upon close inspection, seems to be wearing boxers, and has a fairly toned form. Thus, it seems to call to Alessa's fear of adult men, possibly even a fear of rapists and stalkers. This seems all the more plausible when one considers how they constantly knock Heather to the ground, then crawl over her body. In this way, they also serve as a parallel to the rompers of the original Silent Hill. Next comes another monster that doesn't really behave like a normal monster, the Glutton. A monster that cannot harm you at all, and yet you cannot harm it. All it is really is a glorified wall, blocking Heather's escape from the hilltop center. At its core, it represents a feeling of helplessness. Truly, the Glutton is something that you can't do anything about. It positions itself right in front of the exit, giving you the feeling that if only it wasn't there, I could leave, but none of my weapons can even scratch this thing. Thus, it forces Heather through the dangerous Otherworld Hilltop Center, making her go further and further away from safety, rather than just letting her pass. Next we have the Missionary, a humanoid monster that killed Harry Mason. The Missionary blurs the line a bit between monster and human. Claudia seemingly was able to order it to commit the murder. Is the Missionary truly just a member of the Order? It is a strange thing to consider. This is also true of the lesser variants of the Missionary, the Scrapers. To save time, since much of the symbolism is the same between these two, I'll cover both here. The two creatures take the appearance of heavily cloaked humans, wearing blood-stained gloves, faceless hoods, and full-body robes that almost take the appearance of a butcher's smock. At their core, they represent the Order itself, the blood-stained hands speaking of the evils wrought by the cult. The lack of a face could indicate the faceless nature of the cult, how the Order itself is an entity without identification that's caused Heather and Alessa so much terrible pain. A common belief is that they were indeed originally human, actually members of the Order, twisted and corrupted by the power of the cult and the Otherworld. Any truth to this, however, is pretty much up to interpretation. Do they look like monsters to you? Next comes the Silent Hill staple, the Nurse. These, however, hearken a bit more toward the nurses of the original Silent Hill, albeit without the parasites. These aren't the more sexualized nurses of Silent Hill 2. Their skirts, for example, are a bit longer, and they aren't quite so revealing in their cleavage. It can be hard to tell, but the nurses of this game actually have visible faces. Their eyes are always closed, and their mouths stained with blood. The nurses themselves symbolize Alessa's fear of hospitals, much as they did in the original game. The constantly closed eyes, that could be a show of how Alessa may have felt, that most of the nurses, save for Lisa, turned a blind eye to her suffering, letting her pain continue. At the end of the hospital, we find Leonard Wolf. However, he is not exactly what one would expect. However, the true nature of Leonard, it's kinda hard to pin down. Is he really a human transformed, or is there more to it? From the conversation held between Claudia and Vincent, it does seem that they both knew that Heather was sent after Leonard. They both knew he was there. However, the monstrous form means one of two things. Either Leonard, much like the theory of the Scrapers, was originally human, but transformed by the Order in the other world, or he is just a manifestation of the town. This, after all, is not without precedent. Maria, for example, was just a creation of the town, as was Lisa. Leonard's form seems a show of how he really was. He spoke like a human, but was really a monster known to abuse and hurt Claudia. Given Alessa knew Claudia as a child, it's hard to say if Leonard's appearance in town is from her own memory or from Claudia herself, given she too knew that Leonard was there. Next is Memory of Alessa. This one, well, it's exactly what it says on the tin. This boss is a manifestation of the memories of Alessa living on within Heather. It serves as one more struggle for dominance between Heather and Alessa, in a much more solid sense. While Heather seeks vengeance and survival, Alessa just wants it all to end. She feels that were Heather to die, while that in itself may be cruel to Heather, it would be less so than if she were to go through with the pain of birthing the god, and the countless pain and suffering that would come from the demonic deity. By defeating Memory of Alessa, Heather is, in a sense, putting to rest this last bit of what essentially is self-doubt, resolving to see this thing through to the end, no matter what. The last of the actual fightable monsters Heather faces is the god. The end result of a highly complicated series of events, the god's form has been created not only by the influence of Alessa and Heather, but by Claudia as well. The most notable thing is the skeletal form of the god. It's incomplete as it was not born properly thanks to Heather's use of the Aglophidus. As it mostly grew within Alessa and Heather, both of whom feared and hated the god, it has a more monstrous form, not at all in line with the beautiful creator of paradise the Order believes in. However, there is one key aspect of it that does have form: the face. The face bears a close resemblance to that of Alessa. This is Claudia's addition to the mix, as she truly saw God in Alessa. In her last desperate act, she gave this much to the god, as she saw hope and beauty where the others did not. Finally, it's time to discuss perhaps the most enigmatic monster in the game. He never attacks you, and in fact often purposefully watches from afar, never in a position to truly interact with you, more an observer than anything else. His name is Valtiel. First, we can dissect his name. Valtiel comes from the same base as the word valet, meaning attendant. The L on the end denotes his status as one of the Order's angels. As such, Valtiel is literally the attendant of God. If you look at high-res images of him, his power in the cult can be seen all the more, as he has the seal of Metatron tattooed on both of his shoulders. He's frequently seen rotating various valves. In doing so, repeating these constant cyclical motions, he symbolizes the central theme of rebirth and reincarnation. In fact, it can be theorized that this is what he's doing in the game over scenes where he drags Heather off to some unknown location. It could well be that he plans to revive her. However, his allegiance is not to Heather, but only to the god she carries within her. This show of single-minded solidarity is seen when the god is transferred to Claudia. He emerges suddenly from the ground, pulling Claudia, and thus God, into another room, away from Heather, who has shown herself to be a dangerous threat to God. He then adorns the newly created god with a ceremonial hood. Having seen to the birth of God, even if it didn't go quite as intended, his work seems to be done, as he's not seen again past this event. I hope you've enjoyed this little journey into the symbolism of Silent Hill 3's monsters, and we'll be starting up the second run next time. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I'll see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well.